story that you need to hear tonight is about what kind of oversight the government has been maintaining over this industry for years. A piece of safety equipment could have been in place on this well, but it wasn't. And critics say it could have prevented the disaster. Now, we can't say that for sure, but we do have questions about why it wasn't in place. Was it because of how cozy government watchdogs have in some cases been with this industry? Ed Lavandera tonight is keeping them honest.
It's hard to imagine how things could be worse for the Minerals Management Service, or MMS. Its 1,700 employees are supposed to regulate the oil industry, but a growing chorus of critics say the agency is nothing short of a disaster.
But it's very clear that you have a dysfunctional agency. You can't trust MMS. They've shown that they're too cozy with industry.
Too cozy indeed. 2 years ago, an internal government investigation discovered ethical failures by more than a dozen MMS employees. Some were even having sex and using marijuana and cocaine with oil company employees.
It was very clear. They thought that partying, drinking, accepting expensive tickets in hotel rooms somehow made it easier for them to understand the business of how much ore and how much oil and how much natural gas was being taken out.
CNN has reviewed hundreds of pages of documents and government reports dating back almost 10 years. Documents that paint MMS as an agency that, in the words of its critics, rubber stamps the oil industry's actions and is unable to enforce safety regulations. For example, in 2000, MMS issued a safety alert calling for offshore drillers in the U.S. to have an additional backup system called an acoustic switch that could prevent oil blowouts like the one now in the Gulf. They went so far as to call it a, quote, essential component. Just 3 years later, after complaints from the oil industry, MMS determined it wasn't so essential after all, saying it would be too costly and ineffective. Never mind the fact that BP is required to use it on rigs in 2 other countries. Let's load up. Stuart Smith is an environmental attorney who has won dozens of cases against the oil industry and is representing fishermen put out of work because of the Deepwater Horizon disaster. We flew over the spill site with him.
That's the slick. It's all over here.
In the years before this disaster, MMS and BP downplayed the possibility of a major oil spill. In an initial exploration plan, BP called a spill, quote, unlikely. So when BP sought permission to drill the Deepwater Horizon site, MMS agreed and went along with it and gave the company a, quote, categorical exclusion from a more strenuous environmental impact study. Environmentalists say such exemptions for oil companies are common.
Once you dig into it, I mean, they are treated with kid gloves in every respect. They are the least regulated industry from an environmental point of view in the country.
Obviously, they're going to argue just the opposite.
Well, they can't.
We wanted to ask BP about its relationship with MMS and the oversight of the company's wells. In a statement, BP said simply, speculation over the causes or implications of the Deepwater tragedy would be premature, adding that the drilling rig was owned by another company. We also wanted to know what exactly MMS would say. But after 3 days of repeated requests for interviews with officials at the Minerals Management Service, they've refused to talk to us. Ed Lavandera, CNN, New Orleans.
More now with Rice University presidential historian Douglas Brinkley. He writes at length about the wildlife areas now in harm's way in his latest book, The Wilderness Warrior, Theodore Roosevelt and the Crusade for America. Douglas, when you look at the investigation from 2 years ago, I mean, forget about the drug use, the drinking that they report, and a GAO report last month, it makes it sound like MMS, these watchdogs designed to regulate the industry, basically is a lot more concerned with the health of energy companies than they are about the health of the environment.
Well, there's no question about it. You know, MMS is part of the Interior Department, and when we think of Interior, think of the National Park Services, you know, Yellowstone and Yosemite, or U.S. Fish and Wildlife, who's trying to manage birds and game in this country. But MMS has to work closely with implementing what's known as the National Environmental Policy Act of the 1969. That happened after the Santa Barbara spill, and it was meant to enforce things like Clean Air and Water Acts, the Wilderness Act, for example. And instead, what's happened is incrementally, year by year, but it really happened during the Bush years of late, MMS has really started working way too close with big oil. And in fact, as the Washington Post is reporting, and if you have seen, they gave categorical exclusion, meaning they weren't even checking for some of the environmental measures, MMS, on this very rig, on the Deepwater Horizon rig that they were supposed to.
And why? I mean, why be so cozy with this industry you're supposed to be regulating?
Because I think we were in a recession starting with the beginning of the Obama administration, April 2009. There was for a minute people thought that the Obama administration might be a little stricter environmentally on offshore drilling, but they weren't. They continued Bush policy. Now, a couple of months ago, MMS has a new head, Lisa Birnbaum, and there's this thought that they're going to clean out the corruption. When you were talking about the Denver office, problems of getting perks for the job, there was starting to be enforced, and then this oil spill happened, and so now MMS is on the hot seat, and you're going to have to scrap the organization and rebuild it from the ground up.
We're going to have more with Professor Brinkley after the break, including his take on the White House today slapping down former FEMA head Michael Brown's conspiracy claim. You may have heard it on the program last night. Brown believing that the White House basically wants this disaster to spread. Also tonight, a question.